The first thing Ethan Harrow heard when the stagecoach rolled into Silver Ridge was a woman yelling that if the driver whipped the horses one more time, she would make him walk the rest of the trail home. The second thing he saw was that same woman climb down from the roof of the coach with a Winchester rifle slung over her shoulder and a folded marriage letter waving in her hand. Every man standing outside the general store stopped what he was doing. Even the blacksmith paused with his hammer hanging in the air. Ethan remained beside his wagon, his huge hands resting on the reins. He was 6 feet 6 inches tall, broad enough to make the wagon look small behind him. Years of cutting timber and working the mountain had turned his shoulders into solid stone. A thick beard covered most of his face, while an old scar crossed one eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline. Most strangers became nervous the moment they looked at him. The woman did not. She marched straight through the muddy street until she stood only a few feet away. "You Ethan Harrow?" she asked. Her voice was bright, fearless, and loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Ethan slowly nodded. "I am." She smiled as though she had found exactly what she was looking for. "Good, I'm Sadie Brooks. According to this letter, I'm your wife." She held up the marriage papers with one hand while balancing the rifle on her shoulder with the other. Ethan stared at the letter, then at her, then back at the letter. The marriage office in St. Joseph had promised him a quiet woman, someone gentle, someone who enjoyed peaceful mountain life, cooking warm meals and staying far away from trouble. Instead, standing before him was a woman wearing dusty riding boots, a weathered brown coat, 2 hunting knives on her belt, and a smile that looked as dangerous as a thunderstorm. "There has to be a mistake," Ethan finally said. Sadie unfolded the letter and pointed at his name. "It says Ethan Harrow, Cedar Bluff, Wyoming Territory." "It does. And that's you." "It is." "Then congratulations." She folded the paper again. "You've got yourself a wife." Several cowboys sitting outside the saloon laughed. Ethan turned his head only slightly. The laughter stopped immediately. Sadie noticed. "So that's your trick," she said. "You scare people without saying much." "I don't try." "I believe you." She looked toward the wagon. "You planning to keep staring at me all afternoon, or are you going to help with my trunk?" Ethan walked over and lifted the large wooden trunk. The moment he picked it up, his eyebrows rose. It weighed far more than he expected. "What did you pack?" "A few dresses." He looked at her. She grinned. "And ammunition." He kept walking. "My father's saddle." He kept walking. "A cast-iron skillet." Still walking. "Oh, and a toolbox." Ethan stopped. "You packed a toolbox." "Every house needs one." He decided not to ask another question. The trip to Cedar Bluff took nearly 5 hours. The narrow trail climbed through thick pine forests before winding along rocky cliffs overlooking deep valleys. Snow still covered the higher mountains, even though spring had already reached the lower land. Ethan expected complaints about the cold. There were none. Instead, Sadie talked almost the entire ride. "How many horses do you own?" "5. "Any cattle?" 38. "Nearest neighbor?" 8 miles. "Any bears?" "Sometimes." "Wolves?" "Often." "Outlaws?" "Once in a while." Sadie leaned back against the wagon seat. "Sounds peaceful." Ethan looked at her. "I don't think that word means what you think it means." She laughed. "I grew up near Dodge City." He waited. She smiled. "This is peaceful." A loud crack echoed through the forest. Ethan instantly reached for the rifle resting beside him. Before he could lift it, Sadie already had hers aimed toward the trees. "What was that?" she whispered. "A falling branch." You sure? Yes. You answer with one word a lot. Usually. She sighed dramatically. This marriage is going to require work. The wagon continued climbing. As evening settled across the mountains, they finally reached Ethan's ranch. The valley opened before them like something from a dream. Tall pine trees surrounded wide, grassy fields. A narrow river curved through the land. A weathered barn stood beside a sturdy log cabin, while snow-covered peaks glowed gold beneath the setting sun. For the first time all day, Sadie became completely silent. She slowly climbed down from the wagon. The cold wind lifted loose strands of her dark brown hair as she stared across the valley. This belongs to you. Yes. All of it. He nodded. I've never seen anything this beautiful. There was no teasing in her voice. No jokes. Only quiet wonder. Ethan watched her. Most women who answered mountain marriage advertisements became frightened when they realized how far they were from towns and neighbors. Sadie looked like she had discovered paradise. She walked toward the cabin. Inside, everything was neat. Simple. Clean. One large stone fireplace. One sturdy table. One rocking chair. One bed. One shelf filled with canned food, tools, coffee, and rifle cartridges. She looked around slowly. You only have one chair. I only needed one. She pointed toward the bed. You only have one of those too. I'll sleep in the loft. She looked up at the small sleeping space above the main room. You won't fit. I fit. You fold yourself in half. I manage. She laughed. You really planned this badly. Ethan placed her trunk beside the wall. I expected someone different. A woman who smiled politely and stayed quiet. He didn't answer. She smiled knowingly. At least you're honest. Sadie removed her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and walked straight toward the fireplace. The fire had almost gone out. You let this burn too low. I was gone since sunrise. She added fresh wood without asking. Within minutes, bright flames filled the cabin again. She searched through his shelves. You have flour. Yes. You have potatoes. Yes. You have dried beef. Yes. She looked back at him. And you've somehow managed to make none of it taste good. It keeps me alive. She smiled gently. Living and surviving aren't always the same thing. Those simple words settled heavily inside Ethan. He carried supplies from the wagon, while Sadie quietly took over his kitchen. Soon the cabin filled with smells Ethan had almost forgotten. Fresh bread. Roasted potatoes. Fried onions. Coffee. Warm butter melting across thick slices of bread. He stood near the doorway for several seconds before speaking. His mother had been the last person to fill this cabin with those smells. Sadie placed 2 plates on the table. Sit. He looked at the single chair. She had already dragged an old wooden crate beside the table for herself. You take the chair. I told you to sit. He obeyed. The meal was better than anything Ethan had eaten in years. Sadie watched him carefully after his first bite. Well, it's good. She crossed her arms. Only good. He looked at her. It's the best meal I've had in a very long time. Her smile returned. During dinner, she told story after story. About a gambler who cheated her uncle. About a runaway horse she once caught with a rope. About chasing 2 chicken thieves through a cornfield. Ethan listened quietly. Finally, he asked one question. You really chased them? I caught one. What happened? I made him carry every chicken back. How? I pointed my rifle at him. Ethan nodded slowly. That makes sense. After supper, she picked up a broom. Ethan reached for it. You traveled all day. I'm fine. You should rest. I rest when things are clean. She swept the floor anyway. A few minutes later, her smile slowly faded. Without looking at him, she quietly said, My father never liked quiet houses. Ethan stopped working. She continued sweeping. When everything became quiet, it usually meant he was drinking. The room became still. So I learned to keep moving. She forced another smile. Moving made the house feel less scary. Ethan looked at her differently. Behind all her laughter, there was pain. Before he could say anything, one of the horses outside screamed. Ethan grabbed his rifle and rushed through the front door. Sadie was already right behind him with hers. The barn door swung open in the freezing wind. The horses pulled nervously against their ropes. Fresh footprints crossed the snow toward the tree line. Ethan knelt. They were too large for wolves. Too neat for bears. Human. Sadie crouched beside him. Someone's here. He nodded once. A dark figure suddenly stumbled from the trees. His clothes were torn. Blood covered one side of his shirt. He barely remained standing. Ethan. The stranger gasped. They found you. Ethan's face turned cold. Sadie looked between the two men. Who found him? The wounded stranger collapsed into the snow. The Riker gang. He struggled to breathe. They're coming before sunrise. Ethan slowly tightened his grip on the rifle. Sadie looked at him. You told me outlaws passed through these mountains. They're not coming to rob me. Then why are they coming? Ethan stared into the dark forest, where distant horsemen moved silently between the pine trees. They're coming. His voice became low and hard. The barn fell silent except for the frightened breathing of the horses. Ethan quickly pulled the wounded man inside and dropped the heavy wooden bar across the barn doors. Sadie followed him without waiting for permission. The stranger collapsed against a stack of hay, his face pale beneath the lantern light. Blood soaked through his coat near his side. I know him, Ethan said quietly. His name is Luke Dawson. He rode with my father years ago. Sadie knelt beside Luke and opened her travel bag. You have clean cloth. Ethan nodded and handed her a folded towel. Without hesitation, Sadie tore it into strips and pressed them firmly against the wound. Luke groaned. They burned the Carter ranch, he whispered. Killed everyone who refused to tell them where you were. Ethan's jaw tightened. How many riders? 8 when I escaped. He coughed. There are probably more now. Sadie looked toward Ethan. Who leads them? Luke answered before Ethan could speak. Silas Riker. The name hung heavily inside the barn. Sadie noticed Ethan's face become completely still. She had known him only one day, yet she could already tell something inside him had changed. Who is Silas Riker? She asked softly. Ethan walked toward an old wooden chest in the corner of the barn. He opened it and removed several boxes of rifle cartridges. 12 years ago, he finally said, the Rikers wanted every ranch in these mountains. He calmly filled his coat pockets with ammunition. My father refused to sell. Luke lowered his eyes. They came after sunset. Ethan continued speaking without looking at either of them. They tied my father outside. My mother begged them to leave. They laughed. His voice never shook. It remained quiet, almost empty. They burned our house. I escaped through the cellar while my parents were still inside. Sadie stopped wrapping Luke's bandage. She slowly looked up at Ethan. You were just a boy. I was 14. What happened afterward? I lived alone in these mountains. For 12 years. He nodded. I hunted. I trapped. I built the ranch. And I searched. Sadie understood. You searched for Silas. Yes. Did you ever find him? I believed I killed him 5 years ago. Luke slowly shook his head. He survived. Outside. A horse snorted. Another answered. Then came the unmistakable sound of several riders entering the clearing. Ethan quietly blew out the lantern. Moonlight slipped through the cracks between the barn boards. 8 dark shadows moved across the snow. One rider stopped in front of the cabin. A deep voice echoed through the valley. Ethan Harrow. Silas Riker. I know you're home. No one answered. I've waited 12 years for this. Still silence. Sadie reached for her rifle. Ethan gently placed one hand over the barrel. Not yet. Silas laughed outside. You hide better than your father. Luke closed his eyes. They'll burn everything. Ethan slowly stood. No. He picked up his rifle. They won't. Sadie rose beside him. I'm coming. You stay with Luke. No. This isn't your fight. She stepped closer until she was looking directly into his eyes. The moment I stepped off that stagecoach, it became my fight. They'll kill you. They're welcome to try. Ethan sighed quietly. He had already learned one thing about Sadie. Once she made up her mind, nothing changed it. He pointed toward the hayloft. Go up there. I can help beside you. You can help more from above. She looked at him for a long moment, then finally nodded. Fine. But if somebody points a gun at you, I'm shooting. Ethan almost smiled. I expected that. Sadie climbed silently into the loft, while Luke remained hidden beneath several horse blankets. Ethan slipped through the side door. Snow reached nearly to his knees. The cold night air filled his lungs. He stepped into the open clearing. 8 riders waited near the cabin. Their leader sat on a massive black horse. Silas Riker looked older than Ethan remembered. Gray filled his beard. Deep scars crossed one side of his face. But the cold smile remained exactly the same. So, Silas grinned. The mountain boy lived. Ethan raised his rifle slightly. You should have stayed buried. Silas laughed. I hear you're married. One outlaw chuckled. Mail order bride. Another laughed. Poor woman. Silas looked toward the cabin. Bring her outside. No. Silas shrugged. Then we'll burn the place. He nodded toward one of his men. The outlaw climbed off his horse carrying a torch. Before he reached the porch, a rifle cracked through the valley. The burning torch flew from his hand. The bullet had struck the wooden handle without touching his fingers. Every outlaw looked toward the barn. Sadie's voice rang out from the hayloft. Next one hits your hand. Silas blinked, then smiled wider. So that's your wife? Ethan answered calmly. Yes. I thought you wanted someone quiet. I did. Silas laughed loudly. Looks like God has a sense of humor. Another outlaw raised his rifle toward the barn. A second shot exploded. His hat spun through the air before landing in the snow. Sadie called again. I warned you. Several outlaws suddenly looked far less confident. Silas slowly drew his revolver. So be it. Everything exploded into motion. Ethan fired first. His bullet struck Silas in the shoulder, knocking him backward across his saddle. At the exact same moment, Sadie fired from the loft. Another outlaw fell from his horse, clutching his arm. Gunfire filled the valley. Bullets tore through cabin walls. Wood splintered around the barn. Horses screamed in terror. Ethan rolled behind the water trough and fired again. One outlaw collapsed beside the corral fence. Two others rushed toward the barn. Sadie shifted across the loft before they could aim. She fired through another opening. One man dropped into the snow. The other threw himself behind a wagon. "She's moving," he shouted. "I can't see her." Ethan used the distraction. He charged from behind the trough. His enormous frame slammed into one outlaw like a runaway bull. The man crashed through a stack of firewood. Another outlaw swung his rifle like a club. The heavy stock struck Ethan across the shoulder. He barely moved. Instead, he grabbed the rifle, snapped it across his knee, and shoved the outlaw backward into the snow. Sadie watched from above. Two more riders circled behind Ethan. Without thinking, she abandoned the loft. She slid down a pile of hay and burst through the barn doors. "Behind you!" Her rifle fired. One rider toppled from his saddle. The last outlaw grabbed Sadie around the waist before she could reload. She drove her elbow backward into his face. He staggered. She pulled one of the hunting knives from her boot. The blade rested against his throat. "Bad idea," she whispered. The outlaw froze. She struck him hard across the jaw with the knife handle. He collapsed instantly. Ethan reached her seconds later. "You left the loft. You needed help. I told you. I know what you told me." Another shot cracked across the clearing. Ethan instantly wrapped one arm around Sadie and pulled her behind the wagon. The bullet shattered a wheel beside them. Silas stood near the tree line, blood running down his shoulder. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You hear me, Harrow? You can't hide forever." He whistled sharply. The remaining riders quickly retreated into the forest. Within seconds, only silence remained. Snow drifted slowly across the clearing. Sadie leaned against the wagon, breathing hard. Ethan looked at her. "You all right?" She nodded. "You? My shoulder hurts." She looked at the torn sleeve where fresh blood stained his shirt. "You call that hurts? It isn't bad." She shook her head. "You mountain men have strange ideas." He helped her stand. The moment she tried to walk, her knees nearly gave out. Ethan caught her before she reached the ground. "I can walk," she protested. "You almost didn't." "That happened once." Without another word, he lifted her into his arms. She sighed dramatically. "You enjoy showing off. I enjoy getting you inside." She smiled despite herself. Inside the cabin, Sadie immediately ordered Ethan into the chair. She cleaned the wound across his shoulder while he sat quietly. "You shoot well," he finally said. "My father taught me. And the knife. I learned that myself." Ethan nodded. Outside, the wind howled through the valley. Then both of them noticed it. A faint orange glow appeared above the distant mountains. Ethan slowly walked to the window. His expression darkened. Sadie joined him. Far beyond the trees, the night sky was burning. Ethan whispered only 3 words. They found Riverside. The orange glow spread higher into the sky as Ethan stood frozen at the cabin window. The flames were too large to be a single ranch. Riverside was burning. Sadie slipped on her coat and reached for her rifle. "How far?" 3 hours on horseback. Luke struggled to his feet, holding one hand against his bandaged side. "They're forcing everyone into the church," he said weakly. "Silas wants the whole town watching when he kills you." Ethan loaded fresh cartridges into his rifle. "He'll kill them whether I go or not." Sadie fastened her gun belt. "Then we don't play by his rules." Ethan turned toward her. "You're staying here." She looked at him as if he had said something foolish. "We already settled that." "This is different." "No. There could be 20 men. Then we'll need a better plan." "I can't lose you." The words escaped before Ethan realized he had spoken them. The room became quiet. Sadie slowly walked across the cabin until she stood directly in front of him. "You won't." She placed her hand against his chest. "But if you ride into town alone, I might lose you." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan gave a slow nod. "We ride together." Before sunrise, the three of them left Cedar Bluff. Ethan and Sadie rode side by side while Luke followed behind on a smaller horse. The mountain trail was silent except for the pounding of hooves. As they reached a ridge overlooking Riverside, smoke covered the valley. Several buildings were already burning. The church stood in the middle of town, surrounded by armed riders. Women and children could be seen through the windows. Silas had gathered nearly 15 outlaws. Ethan studied the streets. "We can't ride straight in." Sadie looked toward an abandoned flour mill standing behind the town. "What's under it?" Ethan followed her eyes. "An old storage tunnel." "Does it still connect to Main Street?" He thought for a moment. "I believe it does." She smiled. "Good." They left the horses hidden among the trees and quietly entered the old tunnel. The passage was narrow and dark. Broken beams leaned against damp stone walls, while cold water dripped from the ceiling. After several minutes, they reached a wooden trapdoor beneath an abandoned store. Ethan slowly pushed it open. Smoke drifted through the empty building. Across the street, they could see Silas standing beside the church. Oil barrels had been stacked around the walls. Sadie's face hardened. "He's going to burn it." Luke nodded. The moment Ethan refuses to surrender. Ethan checked every window. "We need to split them apart." Sadie pointed toward the church bell tower. "If that bell starts ringing, everyone will look up. You'll be trapped. Only if I'm slow." Before Ethan could stop her, she slipped through the back door and disappeared into a narrow alley. He closed his eyes. Luke smiled faintly. "You certainly didn't marry a quiet woman." "No." Ethan almost laughed. "I married a storm." Sadie climbed onto the roof of a nearby shed before jumping across to the church balcony. Her fingers barely caught the railing. For one terrifying second, she hung above the street. Then she pulled herself over. One outlaw noticed movement. Before he could raise his rifle, Sadie threw a loose roof tile. It struck him squarely across the forehead. He collapsed into a rain barrel. She hurried inside the bell tower. Moments later, the church bell exploded across Riverside. Its deep sound echoed through every street. Every outlaw looked upward. That was all Ethan needed. His rifle fired. One guard outside the church dropped instantly. Luke opened fire from the abandoned store. The townsmen trapped inside the church broke wooden benches into clubs. When another outlaw opened the church doors, the blacksmith smashed him across the face. Within seconds, the townspeople poured into the street. Gunfire erupted everywhere. Silas shouted orders. Kill them all. The outlaws scattered. Smoke covered the town. Bullets shattered windows. Horses screamed as they broke loose from hitching posts. Sadie continued firing from the bell tower until splinters exploded around her. She crawled to another opening. Below, she saw Ethan surrounded by 3 gunmen. Without hesitation, she fired twice. Both men fell. The third turned toward the tower. Too late. Her third bullet knocked the revolver from his hand. Ethan looked up. Their eyes met for only a second. He smiled, then turned back into the fight. Across the street, Silas grabbed Luke from behind and pressed a revolver against his head. "Ethan," Silas shouted. "Drop your rifle." The entire street froze. Luke looked at Ethan. "Don't." Silas pressed the gun harder. "I'll kill him." Slowly, Ethan lowered his rifle. Silas grinned. "I've waited 12 years for this." A shot suddenly echoed from above. Silas cried out as his revolver flew from his hand. Sadie stood high in the bell tower with smoke curling from her rifle barrel. Ethan charged. His massive shoulder slammed into Silas with enough force to send both men crashing through the doors of the burning hotel. Inside, flames climbed the walls. Burning beams crashed from the ceiling. Silas grabbed a knife from his boot. He slashed toward Ethan's ribs. Ethan caught his wrist. The 2 men struggled across the burning floor. "You should have died with your father," Silas growled. Ethan looked him directly in the eyes. "My father died protecting innocent people. You killed him because you were afraid of a better man." Silas roared and attacked again. Ethan sidestepped. He caught Silas by the coat, lifted him completely off the floor, and threw him against a burning support beam. The heavy timber cracked. The ceiling groaned. Outside the window, Sadie appeared. "Ethan." "The building's coming down." Silas reached once more for the fallen knife. Ethan kicked it deep into the flames. A burning beam collapsed between them. The entire roof began falling. Ethan dove through the broken window. Sadie grabbed his arm. Together they rolled across the muddy street just as the hotel collapsed behind them. Flames shot high into the morning sky. Silas Riker never came out. The battle ended within minutes. The remaining outlaws threw down their weapons. Others fled into the mountains. By noon, the fires had been brought under control. The church still stood. Most of the town had survived. Luke's wound was treated by the town doctor. He would recover. Later that afternoon, the town sheriff handed Ethan a leather ledger recovered from Silas's saddlebags. Inside were signed papers proving every ranch and farm the Riker gang had stolen over the years. "We can give everything back," the sheriff said. Ethan closed the book. "Then make sure every family gets what belongs to them." A week later, Ethan and Sadie returned to Cedar Bluff. The valley no longer felt empty. There were now 2 rocking chairs beside the fireplace. Fresh curtains covered the windows. Flowers sat outside the porch. Laughter filled the cabin almost every day. One evening, Ethan found Sadie trying to saddle a wild Mustang. The horse spun in circles, refusing every command. "That horse is going to throw you," Ethan called. Sadie smiled without looking back. "It just needs someone patient." "You say that about everything dangerous." She finally looked at him. "It worked on you." Ethan laughed. The deep sound echoed across the valley. Sadie walked over and wrapped her arms around his neck. He kissed her forehead. Months earlier, he had asked for a wife who would stay silent, obey every instruction, and disappear into the quiet of the mountains. Instead, life had sent him a fearless woman who challenged him every single day. stood beside him when bullets flew, filled his lonely cabin with warmth, and turned a cold mountain into a true home. That night the fire burned low, while snow drifted gently outside. Sadie rested in Ethan's arms, smiling as the wind whispered through the pine trees. The giant mountain man had searched for peace. Instead, he found something far better. He found a wild heart that refused to be tamed. And until dawn, she reminded him that the greatest blessings in life often arrive looking nothing like the ones we ask for. To finish what they started 12 years ago,